In the past, I've given sermons based on biblical text or lectures on topics of interest to me. Today, I will talk about being a baptized, Bible-believing, Spirit-led Christian. The term I use for these beliefs now is union life. Union life is about living up to the teachings of Jesus. When I try to do this, I usually fall short. Union life is a movement within Christianity that is found in all Christian denominations and answers the question, what do I do when I come to the end of my strength and have not been living up to the teachings of Jesus? Union life is about finding that strength from God or your higher power or Emerson's oversoul. Soon after 9/11, Earl Davis, a member of a nearby church, started leading a Sunday night Bible study at the Greenwood Baptist Church. Earl introduced us to the concept of union life. Union life is based on Colossians 1:27, which says, "To them God chose to make known how great among the Gentiles are the riches of the glory of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory." Earl taught us that we are created to contain the Spirit of God by saying that Christ lives in us, through us, and as us, much like the Buddhist teachings of the hollow bamboo rod, where I am used as a conduit for God. Earl had traveled the world as a sound technician for Les Paul and Mary Ford. He had a lot of spare time that he used to read Christian authors. Although I had read many Christian books, including books by St. John of the Cross and Brother Lawrence, The Practice of the Presence of the Lord, I had never heard of Watchman Nee. He introduced me to Watchman Nee, who was a Chinese Christian pastor and teacher. A large part of Watchman Nee's ministry was teaching other pastors. Most of his writings come through us from a dictation of those teachings. He wrote very few of those teachings down himself. He did, however, write one book called The Spiritual Man, where he gives his understanding of what the Spirit is. For Watchman Nee, he separates us into our faculties into three areas: body, soul, and spirit. The body includes our ability to move, speak, see, touch, and hear. The soul includes our mind, our will, and our emotions. One of the easiest ways to understand that is kind of what we call our personality. It's what we have, the raw material we have to deal with the world and to create our own self. Our spirit then includes our intuition, our conscience, and our communion. Intuition sometimes can be considered as imagination. Conscience is really determining what's right and what's wrong, and can be thought of as that old Christian concept that the Holy Spirit will convict us of sin. Our communion with God is easier to understand since it basically says that we are all connected to one another and therefore need to help one another. Our spirit, when active, uses the soul and body to express its intuition, its conscience, and communion that flow from the Spirit of God. As a spiritual man, I try to seek the Spirit of the Lord in my spirit so that I can understand that I am in communion with God and with others, know when my actions are out of step with the leading of the Spirit, and when I am inspired by thoughts that come from the Spirit of God. The easiest way to understand that is that more often than not, if we have a dilemma, there are two options for us. And logic tells us that what we have to do is break one of those horns of that dilemma. However, when the Spirit enters into it, we sometimes come up with a third option that we had never thought of before. Thus, the Spirit is leading us to a new understanding of what we should be doing. When Christ lives in us and through us and as us, I'm reminded of a member of the congregation that used to tell me not to be so heavenly minded that I'm no earthly good. So we need to have the practical results of what union life can do. When Christ lives in me, it's about that personal self, and it lives in me and becomes a little bit different. I'm being led by the Spirit. And when I'm led by the Spirit, I don't trust my emotions, and I can not take offense at what other people do and say. It's as if we were reminded of what Jesus said, that when you're persecuted for my sake, you are going to be blessed. So that helps us to recognize the fact that what other people do and say and how they affect us is not the last word on the subject. More often than not, when somebody hurts us or says something that we don't like, they usually forget about it as soon as they walk away from the encounter. We, however, carry that with us. So by not taking offense, we can lay that burden down too. When Christ lives through me, it's by not using my mind to judge what other people should do. I've often thought that we have an idea that there are certain jobs that need to be done within a Christian congregation or any congregation. And those jobs have to find somebody to do them. However, if nobody is being told to do that job, I find the best thing to do is to just let it not be done until somebody actually decides that it's their job to do. We have to be careful not to judge other people because they have a spirit too. And that spirit or that conscience will judge them. And what they need to work on might not be what we think is the most important thing for them to work on. When Christ lives as me, I have to surrender my will. And when I surrender my will, I can be used by God to express God's love that comes from the communion of the Spirit and not see other people as ways to get my own way. More often than not, we see people as objects in our lives. But when Christ lives in me, I recognize that I need to always look for God's will, just as Jesus did on the night before he was crucified when he said, "Thy will be done and not mine." That kind of surrender is important and allows us to really express when Christ lives in us. Although I do not experience union with God all the time, when I do, it allows me to not take offense, to not judge others, and in general to express God's love and acceptance to everyone I come in contact with. When I live in union life and Christ lives in me and through me, I preach the gospel all the time. And when necessary, I use words.